Well, thank you all for joining. This is the Festival and Event Design follow-up. Special thank you to the Smithsonian crew for taking the time to be here. I'll introduce myself first and then we can get into it. I'm Taylor Bass. I'm with the Uplift team and I'm just kind of here to do the technical side of things, make sure everything goes good. Um, so thank you all for being here. I will pass it off to Hallie.
Yeah, thank you to my Folklife colleagues for joining us today to talk about festival and event design. Just to give everyone an overview, we had our workshops with organizers across regions in North Carolina in August that Diana and Jai and I taught together. And so this is the third and final Q&A session. After those workshops, we gave everyone an opportunity to say where they would like some more information. And festival and event design was one of the top picks in terms of subject matter. And so we wanted to give the opportunity for folks after the workshops to be able to think about these things and come back to us with questions and to have a conversation about how we do that work. How do we make those decisions at Folklife when we're planning our festival? And so what I'd love to do is I'll call out names from my colleagues. If you all could just give a short introduction about who you are and how your work relates to the festival and the design component of the festival. And I'm going to start with Arlene.
Hi, I'm Arlene Reiniger. I've been with the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage for several decades, and most of those times I have worked on some aspect of the Folklife Festival. So I usually work in the capacity as a program coordinator, working closely with the curator or team of curators to help them um, uh, actualize their vision for the program content and programming. So great to be part of this conversation.
And for those of you who I met in North Carolina, I talked a lot about having the experience of co-curating the Armenia Festival program. Arlene and I worked very closely on that. And I kept telling everyone that somehow I didn't realize it, but we shared a brain because Arlene has this uncanny ability to hold all the information that you ever needed and answer the question before you can even formulate it because she's already thinking about it. And there were lots and lots of discussions of how on earth are we going to translate this concept into something realistic. And those decades, or what did you say, several decades of experience, a few, I think really came in handy for, kind of understanding what was and wasn't possible on the site. So Arlene was very kind and supportive and helping rein in any crazy ideas, but also encouraging some creativity as we were thinking about how to create that Armenia program.
It's completely teamwork.
Always. It is. That's true. That is true. Okay, let me take it over to Jordan. Thanks for joining us from the tech crew.
Hey everyone, my name is Jordan. I'm the Assistant Technical Director for the festival. So I work alongside Tyler, the Technical Director, who's currently at an appointment but hopes to join us soon. We basically work with the curators as well as our stakeholders at the National Park Service, other internal stakeholders like our operations and production teams to actually facilitate creating the site map. So we help work with the curators to see what all they will need and then determine the structures that they might need to do those programs. And from that knowledge and the knowledge that we have of working with the National Park Service and other stakeholders that kind of determine our limits and what rules we all have to follow, we help create the site map. We also design the structures. So we work with our internal engineering teams to make sure that they are safe for use outdoors, as well as working with all of our vendors to make sure that all of their equipment and tents and structures follow all of the same rules and regulations that we have to follow.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us. And I just want to mention, because we don't have the full roster of everybody that's here, but Uplift has this awesome knowledge center. I shared the link with some folks that has our toolkit from the festival workshop. So that's why Taylor's recording this session, because it will actually be available for folks to watch at their own time. Because I know one of the things that I remember from our festival organizers is all of them have other jobs. They usually are not paid to organize festivals, so many of them are at work and it's hard to get and participate in sessions. So I'm going to pass it over to Jim. Tell us about your experience.
Yes, I'm Jim Deutsch, and I've been a curator at the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage 20 years this month. I started as a curator in September 2003 and have worked on a variety of Folklife Festival programs over those years, including working with Arlene Reiniger on several occasions. As Arlene said, kind of the curatorial side works very closely with the coordinator side and with the technical side and the supply side and transportation, and we work very closely together to produce the programs for our Folklife Festival, and happy to share some of that experience during the next hour.
Thanks, Jim. And Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. I'm a curator with the Folklife Festival. I've been here since 2018, and I do the things that Jim just described, working closely with tech and design to figure out the look and feel of our programs, how that's going to communicate, the messages and content that we have to share. And we also rely on tech to keep us safe and compliant as well. I worked really closely with Jordan this year. I'm sure she probably got tired of hearing my voice sometimes, but we do have a great team that pulls together to accomplish things.
Awesome, thank you. So as you all can see, we have some great folks here to add in and answer any questions that you might have. So before we go, there weren't very many submitted questions beforehand. So before we go to those submitted questions, I want to give you all a chance to ask if there's anything that you've been thinking about in terms of design, kind of hearing from our team and some of their background and expertise. Are there specific questions you might have or experiences from your own festivals that you would want to share that we could discuss?
Hey, everybody, I'll ask a question. When I think design, and I don't even know if I'm thinking along the right lines, but one of the things that I've struggled with a large event that we put on is mapping it out and having a good map that leads people to where activities are happening. So I feel like what we have could be so much better. And so I was hoping to maybe get some tips if there's any particular, I don't know, software or apps or anything like that that can help us have something that looks more professional.
Jordan, I'm looking at you. Do you have some ideas?
So for us, I mean, we do have a graphic designer on staff who works on the majority of the creation of the map. From an accessibility standpoint, there's different kind of visual guidelines that you ideally want to follow. And I know I have probably a list of them somewhere from our accessibility coordinator. Honestly, I think the easiest thing is to have your main stages. I know not necessarily for our festival, but for the North Carolina Folk Festival, their map does a fantastic job of identifying the key corners as well as the streets in a legible form so that you can easily try to get from one area to another without having so much information on it. I'm going to see if I can pull up our map.
I have it, Jordan. If I can share my screen, I'll show our designed map. Actually, I was thinking, Jordan, maybe we could I can share the design map and then you could share the site map that we use internally and
sure.
Compare, contrast. So, sorry to interrupt you. Please say more if you're saying more.
Not yet. There we go. Trying to find them.
So what I'm sharing while Jordan is looking, I'm scrolling up and down a little bit. This is the map that was used for the festival that we had this summer, and it's a pretty complex one in that it's spanning multiple different areas on the National Mall. You know, we're indicating things on the street side above and below. But I guess what I would point out about this that I think makes it effective is that there's a few things that are given like a custom icon, these kind of landmarks, and then most other things are just represented as kind of a generic tent shape, and they're labeled. But for example, we have the boat over here as a special feature that's highlighted on this map, or a little bit lower down, like the garden. So
Or the
yeah,
semi truck that has a mountain biker coming out of it.
yeah, I mean, that would intrigue you and make you want to go to that place. And then that also has, you know, useful information about where accessibility services can be found, where you can get information or where you can get help if you need it in case of an emergency. So those things are super important for the map. As far as like, yeah, navigation, we have like the metro station indicated here. This map we put in our program guide, which is like a brochure that we hand out, and it's also available on the website, like where I'm showing it to you now. I don't know how many people actually access this map on the web during the festival itself. I don't know.
I
Let's
know
see.
for like our site encompasses a pretty large area.
Yeah.
And so some of the most important, like when you're creating it, you always want to approach it from that mindset of someone who has no idea where they are. They've never set foot in the town, they've never set foot on the National Mall. All they know is that there's a Washington Monument somewhere and there's a Capitol somewhere. And if I can find those, then maybe I can get oriented. So on our map, we have the large buildings and their directions that you can kind of see where you're at and where you're going. But what we also do on site itself is create wayfinding signs that have arrows pointing to each of the things, as well as fairly large signage on the structures themselves to identify as far away as you can see that is our concessions area, that is the guitar workshop, it is that is the front porch. So we create as much signage as we can. We also our gates that are on this map that kind of cut open in the colored lines on the plots. We usually put some sort of decorative feature there to highlight that that's an entrance into that area. We're very lucky on the mall that our sight lines are pretty open. From one side of the mall, you can see clear over to the other, so you don't really have to navigate that far through a city or anything. There's not many massive turns you have to take that you can get turned around in. And we also have just very large signage on the scale. I believe I have a printed picture that's easier to get to.
While you're doing that, Eileen just asked about the landmarks. Is there certain software that creates this? And I would say, I'm sure that Josue uses, our designer uses Adobe Suite. However, you can use, I know that Uplift is offering workshops in Canva. And so this sort of map, like scale matters, but it's not perfect. So you don't have to actually worry about it as much. It's more like a visual kind of reference point. And so when we did our festival, the little festival in Armenia, Eileen, I think you were on Monday when we met with Ashkan, and she worked on a crafts festival there and made the map in PowerPoint because we didn't have any other software to use. So anything, I think Word is a little clunkier than PowerPoint, but you know, you can just kind of use shapes and things like that and pull them in, and they've got a bunch of icons. I think that's the simplest. But if you can, I've heard great things about Canva, and I love that Uplift is also offering those kinds of introductory classes. So you could definitely make this kind of map in Canva.
Yeah, I know that our
Canva-
designer, our designer has been using Adobe InDesign to create this map. At least that's what was used in previous years.
Yeah,
The other great thing
Canva.
about Canva is like many young people who might volunteer or staff your event will be familiar with it already. Sorry, Jordan.
No, that's okay. That's what I was going to say is Canva. Canva is free in many ways. There's premium options as there are with all software right now. But like Rebecca said, anyone that's been through high school, college, or teaching recently will most likely be pretty well oriented with Canva. If you don't have that, but you have some of the Microsoft suite, but PowerPoint might not do what you want. Microsoft Publisher is what I have used in the past. It kind of got pushed out by InDesign and Adobe Illustrator, but it is still, it's kind of Microsoft Word without all the clunkiness of Microsoft Word. And I believe in the current version of Microsoft Word, there's a publishing layout that gets rid of the whole insert a picture here and it shifts your whole page one way. It kind of gets rid of that issue. But yeah, the most important thing is kind of identifying your largest landmarks, your largest stages that you want to draw people to, and then your first aid, your info booth, your accessibility, those symbols. I'm sure you can probably find free clip art online of kind of something to give you that consistency across the map. And then the smaller ones, you can either, like, I believe that mural trailer, if I'm looking at it right, is actually just a like scaled down version of pictures of those muralists' art that we have pulled from their websites.
Great, thanks, y'all. I'm curious, Jordan, do you have that? I showed some of our CAD maps that we have. I shared those in the toolkit because I did something similar for Armenia, but like if we pull back the curtain and show what the AutoCAD version looks like, that one's to scale. So I think for bigger festivals, I remember, Eileen, I think it was even in our festival, the guys that had that huge, the ones that did the booklet, that ag festival, or the farm, I'm trying to think of the name of it. But in any case, I remember them saying that they used AutoCAD.
Yep. So we use AutoCAD.
Yeah,
hopefully you all can see my screen, and if not, let me know. We use AutoCAD for all of our structures and sitemap design. And so, like Hallie said, all of this is to scale. And so this is what we send Josue, our designer, and that is what he pulls from to create the graphic sitemap. So you can see kind of the differences and between the graphic one is our main stage is actually the largest structure on site, but it's not necessarily shown to scale on the graphic design map. Our AutoCAD map is a whole lot busier because that's what I will go and talk to Rebecca about, talk to the curators about, and say, hey, this is where we're thinking of putting these 3 structures, but you can see that we're having some struggles fitting this inside of the protected tree zones that we have to work around. So what do you think about moving it here or here? And the nice thing about that on the front end of everything is that we can move stuff in time and see pretty much exactly where it's going to fall in scale so that we can figure out any issues before we actually hit them.
I remember those sessions of sitting, Arlene, with our map, and while Tyler was like, okay, well, here's how big a tent is, and moving it around, and you have your hopes and dreams of how you want to organize things, but we have a lot of constraints in our space that we need to work with, and this tool has been so helpful in being able to understand that and make it a lot easier when we get to the actual build out of the site and start, kind of bringing it to reality.
Yeah, and I was going to say it may not look like it from an outsider's eye, but there is rhyme and reason to why we put these tents and venues where they are. We tend to put some craftspeople in the same vicinity so that they can be sort of talking to each other. If we have a narrative stage, we try to place it far from the music stage so that there's not a whole lot of sound bleed going on. There's going to be some, but and I mean, a lot of our placement is dictated by the trees and being on the National Mall and all the rules and regulations we have to abide by with that. But you know, we're trying to put the site together so that it mirrors the themes that we're working with in the program. And I don't know, you know, you may not be dealing with um, anything like that in your festivals, but you know, there is a lot of thought that goes behind where every single tent and every single structure is placed.
I'm curious, for Jim, Arlene, Rebecca, in your experience with curating, can you give an example? And maybe let's start with Rebecca because we have Creative Encounters up. Can you give us an example of some like one design decision that you felt worked really well in terms of the type of vibe that you wanted or the type of feeling that you wanted to create at the festival? And then one thing that you felt didn't work and why?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I felt that we were able to succeed at doing what Arlene was just describing and create kind of neighborhoods where people with similar activities were grouped together in such a way that they could meet each other and kind of cross-pollinate with their activities. I won't talk through all of them, but oh, thanks, Jordan. I thought that that worked really well for us. Some of the things that didn't work, it's like there's always unforeseen stuff, right? Like we've been talking about how closely and carefully we plan, and then you get out there and there's like things that you didn't know about, or the tent vendor sends the wrong tent style, or you know, things that come up that we have to problem solve. So one example of that is if you look over on the left, there is a rectangular tent labeled Ofrenda. It's kind of, yeah, facing up and down. And we chose that placement like consulting with the artisans that were using that tent about like where the shade was going to fall and how the public was going to approach it, what it would look like. And then something happened, which was that on the sidewalk behind this tent, like outside of our fence line, so not in our property, were installed some of the porta potties for the 4th of July fireworks event. And then, so for like several days, and all the photos of their beautiful installation, there were porta potties in the back. So I don't think that that really like diminished the experience for everyone, but it was just sort of like
Rebecca, I thought you were
not
going to say
ideal.
bucket drummers decided to start
Oh,
playing right there,
no,
taking
that's just,
away from the whole ambiance.
that is just as part of the experience, Arlene. That is funny that you mentioned that. Yeah, we do have some bucket drummers.
Well, and I was going to say, for
Um,
those that might not be aware, the ofrenda is an altar that's an offering for people who have passed on. So it's like a very reflective space, and it's very
mhm.
beautiful with flowers and candles. And so it's like, imagine having this space that's meant to honor our deceased family and friends and ancestors, and then right behind it is the row of the porta johns. Which is like, I didn't know
Yes.
that I was over there that whole time. I'm glad I didn't
Well,
notice that.
thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't, I guess that's not like a huge crisis, but it just is an example of like there are things that come up that you don't anticipate and can't always anticipate. Oh, I have one more comment while we're on our plots. Looking at the right-hand side, there's two little boxes that are labeled the Sukkah and Nowruz. These are both like small tents and structures, and you can see that they're placed kind of nestled into the trees there. Um, that was a beautiful spot. We had arranged them to kind of face to the north, to like face the larger tents that are above them across this aisle. But one thing that we sort of tried to shift our activities a little bit was actually to play more towards the south. We realized once we got going that these structures, it was almost like they had their back to the main walkway, which is like where the text creative encounters is appearing, that's where like most of the people are approaching the site from. So we got some feedback and we tried to like kind of rearrange a little bit of the activities so that we weren't showing the back, so to speak, of those structures, and not leaving this beautiful green circle representing the tree span, roughly, not to leave that space kind of empty. So that's an example of considering not only like kind of the concept of the space, as we were talking about earlier, but also like how the public is going to approach it and what's going to be sort of their first look at that area.
I hadn't realized that. It's kind of fun to do this after the fact and think about those things. All right, I know we've been chatting a lot through examples. Is there anyone, any of y'all has any of this brought up any other questions or ideas or thoughts on your own space and your festivals?
Yeah, I've got another example of design.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, Jim. Thanks.
Can I share my screen, Taylor? Okay. Yeah, this is so this is from the World War II reunion we did in 2004, and we tried to kind of recreate the design aesthetic from World War II using World War II recruiting posters as our event markers. So what you see kind of down the line in the foreground was the Capitol Canteen, which was a music and performance venue. Beyond that is family activities. Beyond that is wartime stories, a narrative tent, and all of the artwork comes from 1940s era recruiting posters, including the one for wartime stories was from the Tuskegee Airmen. So they kind of this visual effect of walking down the mall and seeing these enormous event markers, I think really helped bring people back to the era of World War II.
That's super cool, Jim. I'd never seen that picture, and I love that idea, using that kind of, were those archival images, the backdrops?
Yes. Well, they were, we got them from Library of Congress.
Okay.
Primarily in National Archives.
Yeah. That's really neat.
Yeah, and this was the first time that we ever used these physical event markers. They were designed for this event.
Oh, and now they're pretty standard. Yeah, we use them a lot now.
20 years, yes.
Yeah, cool. Well, what also is striking to me is how many of them there were, which is also kind of neat. They're like more powerful when you have a lot of them.
Yeah. And then as well as the kind of the large banners across the gravel walkway also used the font that was in use in the 1940s. So all of those were design decisions made by our design team, along with the kind of the technical team are the ones who came up with the design for the event markers, as well as the banner bridges.
Another thing I think might be helpful to talk about a little bit is during our workshops, we touched on accessibility. And Diane, our accessibility coordinator, gave us some really good points that are in our toolkit. And I'm curious now from curating, and Jordan, for you, because you've worked on other festivals too, how has our attention to access on the site, what are the ways in which that shifted your ideas about space and design, and has that influenced the way that you think about your work and do your work?
Most definitely. I think it actually affects me more on festivals or events that I don't work on. Pretty much any major event that I go to now, like I've gone to there's a minor professional tennis tournament that happens in DC. I've gone there, I've worked other festivals, I've done work at theme parks, and I've never worked anywhere that has put as much energy and effort into designing to be as accessible as possible as we have here. So when we it's shifted my brain on the design of things, because now one of the first questions we ask when we're designing a structure is, how do we make sure that this is as accessible as possible for everyone? I will see if I can pull up a picture quickly. There's a structure that we built this year, the teaching garden, that we built for our Ozarks program, where we had a lot of native plant specialists from the Ozarks coming in, talking about these plants with everyone there. And so we took a structure that we had already built and then actually built a garden around it, to give them a like standing level Ozark garden, basically. And it was stepped and terraced to show the stepped in to show basically the actual geological landscape of the Ozarks as well. But on one corner of it, we had actually built it up and over so a wheelchair user could roll underneath it and still interact with all of the plants at chest level, as well as making sure that there aren't major trip hazards, or someone using a cane can tap along and make sure that they don't interact with it in a way that makes them trip or is less than ideal. So when we design things, we try to work on it in a way of someone like focusing mostly on someone with a disability that affects how they walk, or if they are able to walk, and then low vision or low visibility. And then when it comes to designing the site, we work pretty closely with Diane Nutting to just make sure we're meeting all the benchmarks that we know of, but also trying to make that extra step of not just making it ADA compliant, but actually making it, because compliance is not necessarily the goal, it's kind of the baseline. So we work toward that and then say, okay, well, are there other steps we can take to make this even more accessible? Our hardest, our biggest hurdle typically on site is our tents, or the transitions from gravel to grass, as well as just the holes in the grass. We don't own the National Mall, we don't maintain it ourselves. And so there's a lot of just features native to the landscape there that create visibility hazards. And so sometimes the only solution that we have for it is putting a safety cone on top of it, because it's high visibility and actually creates a physical thing for someone with a walker or a cane to tap along into. And then I know this year our tent company gave us the wrong tents. So we have a standard that's listed with our vendors of what specific tent they have to install that basically says no guy lines. So it's no rigging lines that come off of the tent to pull it to the ground, because that's a thin aircraft cable material and is hard to see. Sometimes it's hard to see even if you don't have a vision impairment. And so typically all they install for us is the full straight support of the tent, which is shiny, it's silver, and it's large. So it's a lot harder to walk into or trip on. And this year they gave us the wrong tents. And so we had to go around and try to, gosh, I even forget what we did. I think on some of them we tied flags, or tied flag tape to, just to try and increase the visibility as much as we can. But ultimately, it's the accessibility of a festival is kind of up to the leadership of the festival. So we have put a lot of effort into it here, but there is another festival that I've worked where not even all of the cable has cable ramp over it, or you'll have a cable crossing that goes across the ADA curb cut on the street itself, and it's not ADA compliant cable ramp that goes over it. So I've personally had to move cable out of the way so that someone using a motorized wheelchair could actually get up onto the sidewalk, and then talk to our electrics team about why it's important that we use the correct cable ramp for them to be able to get onto the sidewalk. Thank you, Rebecca, for bringing up that picture. So this is our teaching garden. And so what you can see in the bottom left is the two different types of cable ramps. So if you're running power to anything on a job site or on a festival site, even if it's just a regular electrical cable, that is difficult for someone with low visibility or a wheelchair to navigate over. And so what we do is we will do long runs of standard cable ramp, which is this cable ramp with the yellow on it. But then we always make sure that there's at least 6 to 8 foot section of ADA cable ramp, which has a much slower grade to it. And so someone using a wheelchair or has a physical impairment, it's a much easier transition for them to make across. And then kind of around the corner of the structure is where the handicap access is underneath. But this is the installation of the teaching garden. So we have levels so that you're not, even just not from an accessibility standpoint, it makes it more kid friendly, it makes it more family friendly. It's more adaptable to people of different heights, and just if somebody is older and they can't like kneel or squat to the level of the garden, it gives them something that is already just at midline height. And I know Rebecca, Arlene, and Jim, you guys probably from a curatorial standpoint have things you've thought about, or just different parts of figuring out programming that makes it more accessible to everyone.
What do you all think? Jim, Arlene, Rebecca, any thoughts on that, on how accessibility and thinking about accessibility has influenced your kind of site design? And Jordan, thank you so much for that. So I just learned a ton. And one of the things that I really like that you said is that you notice it more where you don't work. I think that's one of the things, having curated the festival, I never knew that I had opinions about these types of things until I go somewhere else and I see how it's done. And I'm like, oh, well, this is weird. Like, why? I wonder why this decision was made. Once you do it, kind of feel. And part of it was like, really kind of recognizing what worked and didn't work in our own space when we did the Armenia program, of like things that we thought were going to make sense that didn't. And how to make those kind of adaptations. So I know what's cool for our festival is having our tech crew and accessibility and continuity of those staff. And Diana's really good at access. So like the dialogue that's ongoing and learning that happens from year to year, I think is really beneficial for us in kind of getting better and better about inclusivity. So like you said, not just thinking specifically about people who might have disabilities, but thinking about how, when you use kind of more universal design in your approach, it makes it a better festival experience for everyone. I see Jim and Arlene both took off their microphones, so let's have a battle.
All right, I'll go. I think the physical aspects of the site, we're always trying to figure out, how to make it as inclusive and accessible as possible. And, Jordan and our tech crew are great at helping us with that. But in addition to that, I think we're also thinking about engagement and how to make hands-on activities possible in as many instances as we can. And we are thinking about people who, may be coming up in a wheelchair, or who are, have visual disabilities, or, we have, ASL interpreters and people with, CART who are typing out captions for our conversations and discussion stages, but also in craft areas and other hands-on activity places. We try to make our activities as have as many options as possible, so that if people want to pick up and feel a piece of textile or wool or silk or a plant, we have these things available, or different activities that are geared to young kids and older people, and people who don't have the dexterity as other people. So we always have these things in the back of our minds, and sometimes in the front of our minds also, as we're talking to our participants, and encouraging them to think through their presentations and their demonstrations, so that they are more accessible to as many people as possible. You're going to give us another picture.
We got another one coming in the chat. Thanks, Arlene. Jim, did you want to add something to that from your experience?
Well, Arlene said it very well, that we try to involve as many of the senses as possible as a way of better engaging our public. And so, tactile, visual, oral, smell, we try to involve as many senses as people are able to experience. And we feel that is a really good way to engage our visitors. And that's one of the things that our festival was designed to do, was to engage these, what we sometimes call curatorial or I guess, cultural conversations, to get our visitors interacting directly with our tradition bearers, our participants, to learn directly from them rather than being mediated through some mobile device, for instance. We feel that direct person-to-person exchange is a very effective way of educating and communicating and sharing the messages we are trying to communicate. And so a lot of that is facilitated by the design to make those interactions happen more regularly and happen more effectively.
While we're on this topic, I just wanted to mention one thing that we do. I'm not sure for how many years we have offered this, but let me finish a sentence. This year, on one day of the programming, we opened up the site early, actually a couple hours early, for a program called Morning at the Mall, which is a spin-off of a program called Morning at the Museum. And basically, it's a time when the site is not fully open to the public, but families and children with disabilities are specifically invited to come during this early time when it's less crowded, quiet. We usually have about just a handful of our participants show up early as well. So it's not the full experience, but it's an opportunity for people that have different accessibility or sensory needs to have access to the program when it's more hospitable to them. So if that is a need that you see in your community, a little bit of extra outreach and a little bit of special hours for those families could be a meaningful way that your festival engages them.
Yeah, checking my email, the earliest I could find was 2013.
That's pretty good.
At the mall. So at
Thanks,
least
Jim.
at least 10 years we've been doing it.
And one thing we did this year that was new to this year was creating a sensory map. So like Jim was talking about with the highlights that we focus on in programming of sight and smell and touch and all of those things, our accessibility assistant actually went through all of the programming and the map and created a overlay of our site map that gave what areas might be of a higher risk for those who are sensory sensitive. So some areas that, like pretty much all of our stages, are loud sound, but we also had some areas where if you are sensitive to smell, you might not want to be around the food prep stations. So that was a great map to have for things like Morning at the Mall, but also if we had any guests who came to our accessibility tent, which is specifically to help people access our site in a way that is safe and comfortable for them, they could get a copy of that map and see what all might be higher risk areas for them or their children.
I didn't know that. I'm glad to know. Very cool. All right, we have about 10 minutes left, so I want to give our colleagues a chance here if anyone has any questions or wants to share about your festivals and design experience. Any other points we haven't covered?
I'll just add that in working on the design for the site and the layout of the site, it starts with our participants. So it's especially important. I keep going back to craftspeople because it's what I've been working with most in the most recent past. But you know, we spend a lot of time talking to our craftspeople about what they do, how they do it, what equipment and materials they use, and especially how much space do they need, because you know, that's what's driving the design site, the site map. And you know, the size of the tent that they have, how many tables do they need? Do they want to display some of their you know, finished pieces and in process pieces? Uh, will they be displayed on a wall or on shelves or on a table, or do we build something, you know, specifically for that? Um, we were in several years ago, we did a program on basket makers, native basket makers, and we had people making hats from Hawaii, and our tech team built this really cool backdrop. I mean, very simple, with pegs, so that they could you know, put their hats on the pegs, and it just made for a really impactful presentation. And you know, we try to think these things through so that, you know, it shines a light on the craftsperson first, and then, you know, in the process we try to come up with ideas to be you know, creatively show their work, so that our visitors will be drawn to those spaces. So you know, we ask our participants to bring as much from their workshop or from their space as possible, so that people can get a good sense of not only just what they do, but the context in which they're doing this, so that it's a more complete story for our visitors and for us. So you know, it starts with them, and then we build out the site from conversations with our participants.
Thanks, Arlene. I just saw in the chat that Eileen offered to share something with us to get some feedback. Let's take a minute and see what you have to share. I would love to see it.
Can I share my screen? I don't know if I can or not.
Taylor can let you.
Let's see.
Yep, you should be able to.
And just be prepared. It's really, really basic now compared to what you
No
guys.
judgment zone.
Okay, let's see if I can do this. Let me open it up first. Well, maybe not. All right, share my screen. There. All right. So this is what we used last year. Let me see if I can get where I can see. So we have an old map that's actually the map of the floor plan of the facility. So that's what I've got here on, you know, showing you the different booths. And then we just line up the number with the name on another sheet for our exhibitors. But the public, you know, we can provide this, but it's not really very helpful to them. And then we've got this, which you can see is, you know, just a Google map of the site, an aerial map. And then we've got those numbers. So again, this is what I'm starting with, and why you can see why I want to have something much better. And I'm open to any suggestions.
One thought right away on this one that you have open with the Google map. You could kind of simplify that using the same idea of what our team does with the where they're not showing the detail. Like, so you could put a big block that's the main building, and you could kind of indicate where the parking lot is, because there's fun stuff here: livestock barnyard, pony rides, pony ride trailer. Like, you could use little icons for that.
Yeah.
Can people understand it more. I
Sure.
think the other thing I was thinking immediately is a question of whether or not you group the vendors by any kind of subject matter area, or like what people can expect to see inside, because that could also help. Like if you have an area that's mostly going to be like, food related items, you can kind of like name those areas and then use an icon to indicate the area. And within that still have the numbers of the vendors, but
Yes. Yeah, because looking at this without having the other sheet that has the numbers and the names, you really,
yeah.
other than the pony rides and the barnyard, you don't know that right here in 103, that was a refrigerated truck that on the outside it's decorated with Smithfield Foods. So that's, a pork company. But we also utilized it we stored ice cream in there because we needed to keep it frozen.
Yeah.
And then like number 114 here, that was a feed truck that actually services farms, and so people can walk right up to the next of it and see how big it is and what it looks like. So, but again, this over here where it says AT, that's an antique tractor area. But you would never, if we had something like the Canva or anything like that, where we could actually have some little tractors, where people could see. So again, it's just, I think there's a lot of room for improvement here.
But I think you can do it. I mean, it seems manageable to me. I'm real curious. I hope you take that Canva class.
Yes.
I'd love to see what you put together.
Yeah, I'm gonna look at the date, and if I can make it, I certainly will take it.
Well, I know some of our folks have to hop off because we're working on curating next year's festival already. So we have another meeting starting in about a minute. So I just want to take a minute to thank everyone from the Smithsonian team for joining us. I really appreciate you all taking the time and being with us today. And for our friends in North Carolina, thank you for your interest and for joining. And thanks, Taylor, for organizing everything.
Absolutely. Thank you guys all for being here. And also feel free to always reach out to us.